Hey, everybody. Welcome. I'm, I'm Smriti Patel, VP of Engineering at Apollo, and I am super excited to be here with you all and with our star-studded panel. From uniting gamers globally on a variety of platforms to building a platform that supports over 120 billion monthly requests, over 300 subgraphs, to building the next-gen currencies and changing company-wide cultures. Today we have with us three amazing leaders who are going to share with us their strategies on how to navigate challenges with different stages of your graph adoption, and through it all, in spite of it all, build a thriving supergraph ecosystem. So let's start with a round of introductions, please.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Devashri, and I'm a senior software engineer at PlayStation. So I've been with the company for the past 5 years, and most of the time at PlayStation went around building the amazing commerce and retail experience that you see on what we call the off-console platforms, the web and mobile platforms that we have. So that would be my work. Very proud to be recognized for that and talking to all of you through this panel. So that is me. And I probably don't want to do software engineering all my life, so want to earn enough money, retire, and be a travel show host someday. So
sounds amazing.
Yeah, so that's me. And nice to be here with these amazing ladies on stage.
Yeah. And I'm Nina. I'm a senior technical product manager at Indeed. I'm currently working on improving the developer experience for our external partner company developers, but I joined the OneGraph effort at Indeed during a time of rapid platform expansion. In that time period, we went from about 3.5 billion requests per month to that 120 billion requests per month. So I was there for that real intense expansion period. And I, in particular, led the growth in our employer-facing org for the OneGraph migration. And I don't yet have a long-term next career path, but I'll let you know when I do.
My name is Stephanie, and I'm an engineering manager at Coinbase. And I was very involved with Coinbase migration from REST to GraphQL. And after that effort fully completed, now we have a large monolith, and we are just starting our journey to decomposing that monolith and really at the beginning of creating that supergraph ecosystem. So, and whenever I retire, I'm going to be a welder.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. A very warm welcome, Devashri, Nina, and Stephanie. All right, so let's dig right in. It's an easy one. So I'm sure you didn't wake up one fine morning thinking, ooh, I'm going to build a thriving supergraph ecosystem and change how my company works. So I'm curious. Tell us a little about how it all started. Stephanie, let's start with you.
Yeah, so it certainly wasn't an overnight process for Coinbase. Our REST to GraphQL migration took at least 2 years, if not more. And then we had a monolith in production for about a year. And that was kind of the point when we realized, okay, something needs to change. We're not getting all of the benefits of the monolith anymore. Like the negatives are outweighing the pros. And so at that point we decided, okay, now is the time when the argument to leadership for federation was worthwhile. Like we could actually present a decent ROI and really get leadership on board for changing the architecture and undertaking another migration. The fact that we completed already a large-scale migration was actually a really good thing in convincing, because whenever you're moving from one thing to another, a lot of times it stops halfway through, and then you have two systems. So yeah, we are right at the beginning of that journey. So.
Nina, how about you?
Yeah, and for us, we actually came at it from a very different place because we'd never had a monolith. But we had a microservice architecture at Indeed before we started getting into GraphQL. And at that time, we were split into two business units, job seeker and employer, and our APIs were very inconsistent, hard to find and discover, and really lacked reusability. And both of our organizations sort of recognized those problems independently. And then we actually went through about a 2-year grassroots effort testing both Apollo Federation and Atlassian Braid schema stitching. And after about 2 years, settled on Apollo Federation for the company. And at that point, we were able to get leadership buy-in, which was fantastic. So that phase kicked off a mandate from leadership that all of our API teams needed to move to OneGraph, our Apollo federated solution, and we really launched into a rapid iteration phase and a mad dash to get into the graph. And that's brought us through to today, where we're onboarding more external partners and trying to harden things and make it a little better.
Amazing. How about you, Deva?
I feel Coinbase and PlayStation have a very similar journey. So when I heard Stephanie talk, I was like, +1 ditto, +1 ditto. Yeah, we are kind of on the same path. So we also are very young on our journey to federation. So we started with this monolith journey. We embarked on this GraphQL journey just before our PS5 launch, when we were reevaluating what tech stacks to use for the next gen. PS5 and the companion apps that we have, our mobile application and the website. So that time, leadership wasn't really keen to disrupt what we have on our consoles. They were like, okay, feel free, go ahead, implement on your companion apps. And that's how we began with our journey. And post the launch, we took, similarly to what Steph said, 2 to 3 years to stabilize our monolith. And since then, we have been striving really hard to get our foundation really strong. And at the same time, our platform team is doing a great job putting up the foundation for federation. And we are now on our way to get federated.
Amazing. So what I heard was almost a common theme across all three of you. Whether it started as a bottom-up organic movement, which later needed stakeholder alignment, leadership buy-in, or later, a top-down mandate across the company, you all had this common need to accelerate business value. And you did that by leveraging the supergraph as this unifying API orchestration platform. And the beauty of a platform is it doesn't exist in a vacuum. What makes a platform real, what brings it to life, is its ecosystem. All the people, how they interact with each other, and the environment around them. And that sounds pretty lofty, building out a whole thriving ecosystem. So, Nina, let's start with you since you're furthest along in this journey. Tell us a little about what you envisioned in your thriving ecosystem, and in short, what was your North Star?
Yeah, great question. So we envisioned several pieces. We wanted consistency, reliability, scalability, and a strong developer experience. And I think it's really hard to strike the right balance between that reliability piece and also empowering fast iteration and development and experimentation in your organization. If you lean too heavily on the reliability piece, you might introduce a lot of things that end up slowing down the development process and really never actually getting anywhere, and then having to stop a migration in its tracks. And then if you lean too heavily on the side of experimentation, you could ultimately end up in a really fragmented landscape that is brittle and you're constantly putting out fires. So my personal philosophy is that this is where the developer experience comes into play. And I promise I'm not trying to pander to a room full of developers right now. But I think that the developer experience is a great pressure test and pulse check for how your ecosystem is doing. Devs generally want to be working on impactful product that helps the business, and they want to be working on interesting things, and they want to be challenged. So if they're spending too much time on menial tasks, there's probably a lot of room for automation to come into play. If they're constantly putting out fires, you probably have a really strong reliability problem. And if they're getting confused and can't follow things, then you probably need to rethink some of your design elements. So I think a great pulse check for that North Star is really have that long-term vision, but then track progress with your developer experience. And that's, if your developers are happy, you probably have a good ecosystem on your hands.
Oh, I love that. Happy developers make a healthy ecosystem. So, take a note of that. And so what is interesting about what you said is it's not just driving developer velocity at the individual level, but it's essentially unlocking this organizational efficiency. Because you covered both the inner loop of build, dev, test, but you also talked about the outer loop of deploy, maintain, and operate in production at scale. And to do that, there's essentially this tension where you've got this big picture, multi-year vision, but the reality of driving incremental value for your organization. And that tension is real. And Stephanie, I'm looking at you because I know you love migrations, and you've said no two are alike. So tell us a little about how you've navigated this tension between big picture and a messy reality.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because even when you're in the midst of a massive migration, you still have to keep the systems running that are currently in place, and you can't just put down one and focus on the other. So for Coinbase specifically, even though our migration from monolith to subgraph was fixing our scalability issue, we still had to work on scalability within the monolith at the same time.
Right.
And so we have had, more than once weekly production load tests that are like pushing our systems to the limits of what they can handle, because we need to be prepared for massive spikes in volume, and we need to be able to scale appropriately. So system-wide across Coinbase, this is a problem that we're working on. And we can't just focus on that, though, because we also need to be doing federation. So what that has actually meant for us specifically is that because we were forced to work on those scalability issues, we realized that we can handle a bit more of a monolith than we thought we could, because we have fixed a lot of those. And so that has really changed how we view how we are going to break apart our monolith. And so it's actually really good that we've had to do this at the same time, because if we were already 3/4 of the way into our migration, it may have been too late to really get a clear picture of where those lines dividing those subgraphs are.
Yeah, and I think for Indeed, I mean, again, our experience has been very different. So we really promoted developer experience and really looked to accelerate the speed with which an engineer could get a subgraph up and running. If anyone checked out Red's talk right before this, I'm sure you're well familiar with our ecosystem around that now. So we had this long 5-year migration, but we were able to find a lot of wins that we could celebrate along the way, and find little pockets of the company where Apollo was helping out either through developer experience or new product areas that we could enable, and new business capabilities that we could expose. And that kind of kept our momentum going. And we grew to a point where now we have 300 subgraphs running in production, which is quite large.
I love what Steph and Nina said, actually. So for us at PlayStation, I believe what it took for us when we first started on this GraphQL journey, that we chose, I guess, the right experience, which was commerce, which is directly tied to the revenue of the company.
Money, money, money.
Right. So once that was live on production, we released all our products. I'm talking about the PS5 launch timeline, where all our products went on production one by one. So that time, our commerce experiences did produce amazing results. And yes, as it was tied to revenue, it became the next shiny object in our organization, and it caught everyone's attention. So we are a global team. We are just not based out of California or in America. We are in Tokyo. We are in London. So it caught everyone's attention, and all the leaders were like, oh, what's that shiny object? I want to experiment with that, right? So GraphQL was that shiny object, yes. So different features, different services wanted to start onboarding onto GraphQL. And we have our amazing platform team that is handling GraphQL at PlayStation. So they're doing a really great job working tirelessly to provide this dev onboarding experience for the newer teams that want to onboard on GraphQL or want to start experimenting with how it looks like. So I would say that was it to prove that, yes, we started with this and we are doing a good job with this. And we, day by day, we are seeing ever increasing traffic on our stores, or we are getting more and more users. We are the best gaming console in the world, yeah, right?
Of course.
Yeah. So yeah, so to maintain this ever increasing traffic and to keep up our promise that yes, we are promising and we are delivering what we promised. So that's one part of it, and then the other part was onboarding newer teams. So that's the balance that we are trying to find. Yeah.
Amazing. So you've set the stage, you've got a lofty North Star, you've also got buy-in from your leadership, you've got your stakeholders aligned, and you're ready to onboard your users. And I love what you said there, Deva. Because 0 to 1 is always fun and exciting, get the first steel thread going, get the second steel thread going. But how do you then think about self-service on adoption to onboard more and more users and more teams?
That's quite an interesting question, Shruti. So let me tell you a story which might possibly land me in trouble. I don't know. But
sure you don't.
No. As I said earlier, that we embarked on this GraphQL journey just before we started revamping our tech stack to prepare ourselves for PS5 launch and the companion apps. So leadership was not really keen getting our console ecosystem, which is like monstrous, right? So to get it on something new that we wanted to experiment, like they were fine, like, but this is working fine, PS4 is doing good, let's probably build on top of that and have PS5 ship. So I don't like to say this, so the off-console platforms, the mobile application and the website were treated as second-class citizens in our organization. And we were like, okay, leadership was like, fine, go ahead, try out, experiment. So we were given like the permission or like, the approval after, again, a lot of convincing to start on this GraphQL journey. And yes, we took it kind of on our ego, I don't know. And we are at a stage where we are live doing amazing. And I would say I wouldn't say majority, but huge chunk of our revenue is coming from these experiences that I got a chance to work with.
Amazing.
So, yeah. So
Something to be proud of. Absolutely.
That actually caught the attention of, thanks Dan for that.
Not just that. I mean, my kid finally knows what I do at Apollo because like, ooh, Sony PlayStation 5, huh? Interesting.
Yeah. So that really caught everyone's attention, and that became the flag bearer for onboarding many more client teams now. So now we are, 1,500 fields on production. We have around 165 to 170 queries, mutations live on production again, one Rust router, and around 15 to 20 client teams all across the world, not just America. And I see my platform team sitting there. They are doing a great job onboarding and supporting this ever-growing traffic and also helping set up Federation. So.
Yeah, and at Indeed, the self-service story evolved over time. Again, we had those first 2 years where everything was a little bit more grassroots at that point. Especially in the early days, it was really our enthusiasts that were getting involved and our champions, and things were probably a little bit less self-service because they were willing to go through some of the pain. And then over time, we started evolving the platform, and especially once we got our leadership team on board and got these company-wide mandates that we really needed to roll out the tech across the whole board, then it became abundantly clear that we needed to make it as easy as possible. Otherwise, our developers would probably be pretty cranky, I mean, leadership mandates are never that fun. But with a really positive developer experience, then everyone kind of got on board naturally. So that's where we wanted to make it as easy as possible to create a subgraph. We tried to make a subgraph creation to production process, push button, and did a lot of templatizing. We also had have a really strong GraphQL guild, and they're responsible for defining our best practices. And then we codify all of those best practices so it's as easy as possible for our engineering teams to adhere to them without going out of their way to hunt down best practices and recommendations. And we also have observability tools out of the box and just, again, try to make it as pluggable as possible. And all of those things together, I think, build a pretty self-service ecosystem and make it really easy to spin up a supergraph or subgraph and hook into the supergraph, which, again, has really helped us onboard 300 individual subgraphs to our one graph.
Hearing 300 subgraphs is making me like, wait, what? We are at like, what, 3 subgraphs live in production, 2 more coming by the end of this year. So I am really curious as, sorry, like I know you are supposed to ask questions.
This is the best way to do a panel.
So I'm just curious, what is the right number of, subgraphs, or what, is there a right or wrong answer to it? I don't know.
Yeah, actually, before that question, I did want to chime in about the self-service. Definitely taking mental notes about self-service adoption here, because we're right at the beginning, so we are working out our self-service model. We don't know what it looks like yet. But one thing that is very apparent is you have a limited window to really define what self-service looks like, because you have the time when you get leadership buy-in and you implement the architecture, and at that point, nobody knows how to migrate to it, right? No one knows how to either onboard a new subgraph or break apart the monolith. And you want to get your self-service adoption model up quick enough so that when teams start to adopt, which you want that to happen quickly, like they have all of the guardrails that they need.
Yes.
I'm really curious about the quality of those first subgraphs compared to like the later ones in the ecosystem, because certainly they probably started happening before all of those like safeguards were in place.
Yeah, funny you ask that. At this point, we do have some governance tooling in place in our build system that will actually fail builds if a subgraph change is deployed that has linting issues, or we also have SLO checks to compare the runtime health of an application when changes are made. So if a team currently makes changes that will reduce the quality of the graph, then we'll fail the build and we won't let that go out. And we've found that to be really beneficial in improving the quality of our subgraphs. But we were a little bit late to the game on this one. So we rolled that out about a year ago, and there were plenty of subgraphs that got into one graph before we really rolled that out. And we are now experiencing quite a lot of inconsistencies in the graph and subgraph contracts that don't quite meet our best practices. And in the case of APIs being exposed to external clients, those are really, really hard to unwind, because you can't just ask an external client to sign up for a migration. So we're kind of going through this long process now of making things a little bit harder and more consistent and adhering to more of our governance-related standards. And yeah, in retrospect, I wish that we had gotten some of those tools in place before we really kicked off that massive platform expansion phase. It was one of those sort of blessing and a curse, having a leadership mandate. It's wonderful, but definitely starts a timeline for you.
Yes. It's so nice to be able to hear these stories for us at the beginning of our journey, so that we can hopefully learn.
Hopefully it can save you some pain.
But Deva, going back to your question, so for us, initially we just assumed, we're going to have hundreds of subgraphs. We're going to have a subgraph for every microservice that we have. And over time, as we've sort of learned more about what we're capable of in like maintaining a monolith, and also looking at other supergraph architectures that have hundreds of subgraphs that are, you're trading off one problem for another when you go to the extremes. We really want to try to find the right way to divide our monolith. And so for us, We really want it to be somewhere in between, like whether that's divided by a particular product or like team ownership or an org structure, like somewhere in between those extremes is where we want to draw those lines. And easier said than done. Right now, we haven't done that yet, but that's like what our goal is. So.
Makes sense.
So a big part of driving self-service adoption that I heard from you was focusing on developer experience, landing and bagging wins, whether they're performance benefits or developer velocity. It was also communicating and landing impact with leadership early and often. And now you've got a good critical mass of happy, engaged developers on your platform. I'm curious, you now have this flywheel of growth going, but how do you ensure that it isn't growth at all costs? How do you strike this balance between developer velocity on one hand and a healthy, governed, responsible growth of the graph? And we touched a little bit around linting errors, but governance might be a bad word, but it is fundamental to self-service at scale. So I'd love to hear about how you strike that balance.
You want to take that one?
I feel like Nina maybe.
Go for it, Nina.
Doing it in production.
I'll jump in.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, so this has been an evolving story for us. We definitely started mostly relying on a very small group of experts within the company, many of which are sitting over there. And they were really responsible for setting the best practices, teaching everyone else in the company about those best practices. And it was much more of a kind of white glove onboarding experience. And then once we had some recommendations in place from them, we built them into a linter so that teams could automatically run their checks and make sure that their subgraphs adhered to our best practices, at least those best practices that related to schema design. But there was still a bit of a manual, or not a manual, but we were reliant on subgraph owners to actually run those checks and not just comment out linting errors if they didn't feel like fixing them.
Right.
So now we've been looking into introducing a little bit more of a stricter guardrails with governance that is a more comprehensive quality score. It does factor in our linting metrics as a proxy for schema design, but it also measures things like SLO health and just the presence that there are SLOs. Something that I would be interested in introducing, in particular for our external parties, is actually having availability and latency requirements in those SLOs. Right now, we just require that they're available, or that SLOs exist in general. And then we also just have some metadata checks to make sure, ownership information and other general sort of health checks are available. But I think that tooling side has really helped us on the governance side. And then I think another big piece of it is just sort of training your engineers and making sure that your developers know the best practices and know the right recommendations. I think generally people want to do the right thing. They don't want to cut corners. So ensuring that they can easily follow and understand your recommendations, I think, is also a really important part of creating a healthy graph in the end.
Deva, how about you?
I would like to add something to what Nina said. So yes, we definitely have those linter checks. We also have checks that whatever schema, if you're introducing any schema, is it breaking the existing schemas that we have? Are you introducing any regressions? We have such kind of checks as well. And the build will fail. You'll be not allowed to merge your PR until and unless you fix that. So that's another wonderful job done by a platform team. So this is one strict guardrail that we have. And then we also have a very strict code owner policy right now, as we are still onboarding on, I wouldn't say onboarding, but still young in the federation journey. So right now we have specific code owners, and in the future, the entire idea of having subgraphs would be to give everyone that you own this is your headache now. You own this is your headache now. But until we get to that point, I feel like at this moment, the platform team is being like that person who is approving everything to
More like
get in.
gatekeepers to
Exactly,
begin with.
exactly.
Right, right.
And eventually we are going to decompose it to the individual platform teams or to the orgs. As you all may know, big organizations, every 3 months you undergo reorgs, which we are not a big fan of, and it's really a headache to manage who owns what or who is where now, right? Because every leader with this new reorgs come with their agenda, right? So, yeah. Come with their own priorities and the business changes and we have to cater to those requirements. So right now we are still trying to find what is the best answer for governance, but this is what we are doing at the moment.
And what I heard both of you say is there's no one size fits all. What governance looks like for your first few teams, for your first few use cases, especially ones you're white gloving and onboarding, looks very different from when you want to open it up for the masses and it's tens of teams and hundreds of teams. And knowing which way to adopt your strategies, where do you go from checks to custom checks, something we recently launched, people, so please take a look, to using lints and proposals. It's super interesting. Stephanie, anything you want to add there around governance, especially as you're going on your decom journey from the monolith?
No, definitely taking away points from what these ladies are saying. But, we're definitely approaching it in a very similar fashion. Like, we want things to be automated, and we want as many, automated checks as possible so that when we do release to the masses, we can be, confident in the quality of the schema. And we do have, custom linting right now, in the monolith. And we are going to be checking out the custom checks. So thank you for that feature. So as we think about what kind of tooling, linting is one of them, but another thing is maybe error handling or, other things that we have middleware in our monolith that everybody gets for free because it's a monolith. But we want to be able to extend that middleware to all of our subgraphs. And so now we need to pull that out into its own library so that we can, give it to everybody for free in that way. So those are the kind of things that we're currently in the process of implementing so that we can be confident about our quality of our schema.
Great. Deva, I want to go back to one thing you said, which resonated a lot as leading engineering at Apollo, which is change is the only constant.
Yeah.
And in almost all our organizations, priorities keep changing, new initiatives come up. I'm curious, how in that landscape do you continue to build momentum and drive awareness for your graph? What are things that get in the way, and what are approaches that you found to be effective?
Great question. So I feel every feature which we are now trying to convert, not every feature, but bigger piece of that feature into its individual subgraph. I always say that every subgraph / every feature comes with its own character, has its own energy. So we need to water these nuances. We need to water these details, cater to those, because not every subgraph is going to be the same. Every subgraph is going to see some issues that the other didn't, and we need to be really careful about that. So that's one thing that I would say that we are definitely trying to get better at, and this is what is definitely getting into the leadership updates that, hey, this is what we are doing, and as your org is onboarding onto this, or as your team is onboarding onto this, we will cater to this and this, because your feature is different from this in this way. And the second point I feel is what I said earlier, that with our ever-growing traffic, what became the shiny object in the first place, we need to make sure that it is doing a good job. So we have our foundation set up, and what promise, based on what promise we are, actually advocating that, hey, this is a good thing to do, let's do GraphQL. We make sure that this is going on well, and our platform team is doing regular checks and identifying what are the redundant fields, or what is actually not performing well and what actions to be taken. So that's going behind the scenes at all times as we move ahead in our journey with GraphQL. So that's definitely a pitch that we have for leadership, that these are the actions taken, these are the issues identified, and this is our course of action. So this kind of works in our favor because we kind of touch the end-to-end flow, right from issue identification to having a problem solver for that. So, and we have this dedicated platform team, which we earlier probably didn't have, and now it's like, okay, whatever it is, we have them as like, they have our back.
Go to.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So, yeah, that's a big thing that works for us, and I would recommend, like, that's great.
So we've got a dedicated platform team
Yes.
that becomes the
Correct.
onboard channel.
Correct.
Great.
And I totally agree with what you said about celebrating wins and highlighting different teams, different needs. I think a really key part of celebrating this ecosystem and noticing where there are wins along the way is recognizing that there are a really broad category of wins within the supergraph ecosystem. At least that's been Indeed's experience. And you can use a lot of those to sell to different people. Different people are going to care about different things. Front-end developers want to use easy and reliable ways to get their data, and they don't really care about, or they don't want to do all the data wrangling that's required, at least for us, and before we move to OneGraph. API developers want to be building their product and want to be investing in interesting things early, but probably don't want to have to worry about security and some of the other things that can be centralized with the supergraph. Even product managers in UX are going to care about performance wins and some of the experience gains that you can get with subgraph. And then your leadership is generally going to have a much, much broader view of everything in the organization health than those individual teams. So for them, you want to focus on reducing duplication, increased reliability, and again, in the case of Indeed, we actually had new business opportunities and can onboard external clients because our move to the OneGraph. So I think a really key piece to gaining that momentum and selling leadership is just recognizing that there are a lot of pitches to make, and you don't want to neglect that pitch because it can get you really far, and it can get people really excited about this journey and keep up that excitement throughout the process.
Don't neglect the pitch.
Lovely.
Please make T-shirts if you need to. It goes a long, long way to make sure you're getting adoption. And the other thing I also heard you say was the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. Whatever you can, use that to drive the pitch forward. I'm curious, we're getting close to time. What would you tell your past selves to drive encouragement and push through the challenges that you clearly have over your multi-year journeys? And looking back, was it all worth it?
I would definitely say so. If we never did it, I would have never been here talking to all of you, sharing my experience. So yes, definitely do it. You would never know if you don't do it. But at the same time, it's really important that what we learned in this journey, so as Prati you asked, we learned about our own services in a new fashion as we started onboarding it onto our graphs, and then we started debugging issues, and there was a lot of firefighting to get things to production because everyone was new to GraphQL at that point. So this learning that we got of our own services at that point helped us really polish those and boost their performance in a way post-production. And I feel what we are doing right now on production is really amazing. And yes, we are constantly working to improvise it. We really value boosting performance. So that was one learning, that we would have never known our services better if we never did that. So that was one takeaway for me.
Great.
Yeah, and for me, I totally agree. I think we should definitely do this again if I were to go back in time. Of course, like the governance piece, there are some things that we would tweak if we had to repeat it, but our API ecosystem is just so much richer. There's so many more tools that we have now, and I think our developers are much happier across the stack. So it's been really, really great for Indeed, and again, me personally, as I'm here. So I'd highly recommend it. And I think one of my biggest learnings is just to recognize that this is a very long journey, and there are going to be a lot of changes. And as you go over the years, you have to be adaptable and recognize that different people in your company will need different things at different times. And you can't just have one approach to this throughout the multi-year journey that it is. You really need to be flexible and stay in tune with your customers' needs. As a product manager, of course I'm saying that, but stay in tune with your customers' needs as you go so that you can kind of tweak things.
Yeah, and we're, again, at the beginning of our journey, so I don't have to go back and give advice I can give advice to my current self. I would say anyone who is at the beginning of their journey or even just a little bit in, like, the most important thing that I've found even just in these last few days is talking to people that are doing it. So talk to each other and come talk to us and ask other companies why they're doing what they're doing. That has been like so valuable, because when you are focused on like your company, your technology, your way of doing things, the way that your leadership thinks about, like, you're very much can be like working in a vacuum. So like broadening that knowledge and realizing like, oh, maybe what we were planning on or what we were thinking like isn't actually going to be the best thing for us down the road. And the only way that you can do that without going down the road and realizing it is talking to other people and getting all of their perspectives before you make those decisions.
So it sounds like, it may feel like a very daunting undertaking, but it can be extremely rewarding, because building an ecosystem is not just a technical problem to solve. It's about systems of systems, starting from the very existence and the why, to the people who build it, who use it, who operate it, and the workflows and the experiences that make it highly exciting, highly thriving. And with that, my key takeaways are the 3 A's: drive acceleration for your business by landing incremental value early and often, by landing that impact and communicating it with your leadership and your stakeholders; drive autonomy for your developers by focusing on self-service adoption, where you're striking that balance between developer experience and the fundamentals: reliability, availability, resiliency, performance, security, all the good stuff. And most important, build a culture of high trust and accountability by using things like governance and baking that into the very ecosystem. So 3 A's: acceleration for business, autonomy for users, and high accountability gives you a thriving supergraph ecosystem. So thank you, everybody. Thank you all. Thank you, Devasheen and Stephanie.